Okay. We technical difficulty, so we're a little bit late, but we are here and happy to have this discussion. So welcome to our third episode of Just Birth. This month's topic is queering perinatal care. I'm Chandel, student and alumni coordinator and instructor with Doula Canada. Before we get started on our discussion, let me introduce...
Before you do that, I think you should just stop your screen share, Chandel.
Sorry. There we go. Are we good? Okay. Thank you. Most technically sound person, as you can tell. So let's introduce these wonderful faces. So Aruna Boudram, who uses pronouns, a queer, gender-expansive community organizer and legal worker from the Caribbean diaspora based in Treaty 13, Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Territory. She is an educator and facilitator that provides trainings on anti-oppression, abolition, decolonization, fertility, queer, and trans family planning, and many other things. She is the autonomous solo, by-choice parent of Surya Amaris, a thriving and resilient former 24-weeker micro-preemie Sagittarius. Aruna is also a therapist in training, the advice columnist for Shameless Magazine, a faculty member for the Birthing Advocacy Doula Training School, and a national family advisor for the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. We have Katie, and Katie is a queer, non-binary certifying postpartum doula. Katie supports families of all genders and orientations during the postpartum period, with a particular focus on inclusion and body liberation. Katie has a PhD in community psychology, and their research focuses on the intergenerational aspects of weight-based stigma, how weight-based stigma moves within families and across generations. Katie has published papers on the topic of reproductive, perinatal, and postpartum care for 2S LGBTQ plus people in larger bodies. Katie is a settler, living and working in relationship with the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples in what is today known as Kitchener, Ontario. Anna is the 2S LGBTQ plus inclusion and engagement lead with Doula Canada, a birth, postpartum, and abortion doula, and a parent of 3 small humans. Her birth and postpartum experiences, both as a parent and a doula, are informed by her identity as a fat, white, queer, non-binary person. She is a facilitator and educator who has spent the past 15 years working to build inclusive spaces for LGBTQ plus S people. So let's get started on this conversation finally. And how I want to start that is by asking you guys your experiences of how you have seen 2S LGBTQ plus people being supported or not supported in perinatal care. Who would like to go first? Katie?
I can go first, that's
sure.
fine. So I think in terms of, I'll start with a couple of comments about being supported and then maybe not supported. And to start really general, like seeing LGBTQ2S plus people and families supported, for me it's been in instances when equity and inclusivity of all kinds is the starting point and not an add-on after in whoever the care provider is, whether it's a doula, midwife, obstetrician, whoever that care provider is, or a friend or colleague. But when equity and inclusion is that starting point, it isn't just an afterthought or an add-on, like, adding additional pronouns to someone's website or sticking a rainbow sticker on a website, but really thinking about that from the starting point. And then the second thing I think in a general way of being supported is when people are just seen and cared for as full human beings, and so not just being seen or cared for as a trans person or as a queer person, or in a lot of my work as a fat person, but as a whole human being. And then just quickly, in terms of being not supported, I mean, there's so many things there. I think there's so many assumptions when we don't start in that place of equity. I think there's so many assumptions about, a family always being two parents, only two parents, and, always two parents. And that those two parents often we assume, about their gender and or sex. And we assume who is a parent and who isn't a parent, rather than just asking. Families come in all different iterations and numbers of parents and care collectives. And so I think when families aren't seen that way, and the only option is, two parents that are, cis men and cis women, that starts off in a very unsupportive way. That's not seeing someone as a full human and their family as a full family. I'll stop there.
Anna?
Yeah, I think heterosexism, so the assumption that everyone is and should be straight and cisgender, is really, really present everywhere, but maybe especially in perinatal care, which means that care providers often approach queer and trans folks automatically already as outside that norm and feel like they need so much more information and are justified in having that information. So one of the biggest questions I've been asked throughout my entire experience with the system is how and why. So how did you get pregnant? Why were you the one who got pregnant? How did you decide which person would get pregnant? Did you do IVF? Did you do this? And before I became a doula, before I entered the field of birth work, I didn't know which questions were relevant or necessary. So felt like I had to meet every single question with an answer and a justification. And that I was always having to justify and explain my family again and again and again. And I didn't realize how much I was doing that or what a strain it was putting on me until I was in spaces where I didn't have to do that, where people weren't looking at my family from this very particular model and weren't making those assumptions from the get-go, so I didn't have to explain and explain and explain. I could just be and experience pregnancy and birth. And that's why I became birth worker, to try and create that space for other people.
Thank you. Aruna?
I mean, both Anna and Katie have really, I think, touched on the big parts of it. In addition, what I would add is that I think that there is also an assumption that is placed on people based on how they look or not look, or how people fit into queerness or not, or transness or not. So, and also I think that there's, I think that there's a lot of, unfortunately what happens, especially with racialized folks, Indigenous, Black, and other racialized people, is that what we end up doing is not being seen as even part of that community itself. So on the flip side of it is that, these things that are in place for, LGBTQ2+ people don't really include us, right? So it's a very whitewashed way of understanding queerness, of transness, of we should be out, we should be at a pride parade. Yes, 1 second, Levy. Sorry, my 2-year-old is here. So her life.
Love it.
So I think that there's also that really big glaring aspect of it, is that is a huge element of, even within that, and thinking about how we can also talk about it through an intersectional lens, and specifically thinking about how we can understand the process of reproductive justice as a whole, especially when it comes to doula care and midwifery care, and what that looks like around centering it from our most vulnerable or marginalized folks, right? So if we center ourselves there as opposed to centering it through whiteness, it looks different, right? So I think the shift is actually systemic and a larger issue than just as Katie was pointing out, just slapping a pride sticker or a rainbow sticker on stuff. That actually, for me, when I see rainbow flags, I'm actually kind of the opposite. I'm I don't know if you're going to be vibing with me very well, because oftentimes that means a very particular kind of understanding of queerness. So what it means is actually meeting people where they're at as human beings first, right? And human-centered care, as Katie very aptly put as well. So just to start us off in that conversation.
Thank you. I'm just going to switch views here now, and you talked about intersectionality, and so let's kind of chat a little bit about that now, and how the intersections of identity impact queer and trans families and their experiences on care. So, you know, Aruna, maybe you can keep going and touch on that.
Yeah, so, I mean, I can only speak obviously from my experience. My experience also is as a non-Black and non-Indigenous person, and so I think that also is a very particular point of like privilege that I have in my experiences that I'm sharing too. It's a very, very different experience in medical and healthcare and birthing spaces for Black and Indigenous folks than it is for other racialized people, including myself. And so that's the first and foremost thing, right? And I think that understanding the ways in which, even when we talk about having BIPOC-centered spaces, oftentimes that still doesn't exclude Black and Indigenous people and queer people and trans people, and especially like feminine identified or femme-identified people. So I think that that in itself, I think, is, I don't even remember your question right now, but I feel like that for me is a really important piece to kind of start from, because, yeah, can you repeat your question? I'm just like, that's so important, and I can't think of anything else right now.
I love it, because it is important, but it was how do the intersections of identity impact queer and trans families and their experiences in care?
So for everything, right? From the initial, like, can I even start a family, right? Those conversations, those possibilities. I can't even tell you how many times I have had people message me or like on Instagram or Facebook or emailed me and been like, I really want to I want to have a baby in my life. I want to have a baby. I want to start a family. I want to do this, but, right? And of course that's true for many queer and trans people, but I think to be a queer and trans racialized person or a Black person, Indigenous person, the barriers just add up and add up and add up and add up and add up. And we see that across the board, whether we're talking about housing or employment or like access to healthcare generally, let alone reproductive rights and justice. I mean, we live in a country that is still sterilizing Indigenous women, right? So that in itself is the reality that we're living in, around the fact that we are incredibly behind in even considering what it looks like for QT BIPOC people to even understand their ability to safely and lovingly and create a family, right? Or to consider having a family, especially when their bodies are constantly under attack. Yes, baby. 1 second, okay. So, I mean, that is a really big answer, and it's a big answer for a reason, and it's because the reality is even when we think about, and you know, as someone who also teaches classes on how to create queer and trans families, it is really hard to, you know, most of those classes and participants usually are white people, right? They're white, queer, mostly queer lesbians or particular kinds of white people who have like also class privilege, who have money, who can consider buying sperm or talking to somebody in the community about sperm. Sperm in itself is a whole conversation on how to access that, which we could have a whole panel on. But I think that it's consistent throughout the whole process of like even imagining that you deserve to have a family as a QT BIPOC person is a consistent like barrier. The world gives you consistent barriers to consider that, right? Up until even like you have a baby, and then you have to consider all the other elements of maintaining your family in like the level of poverty and housing crisis that we're in right now, right? If we think about even poverty, oh my God, she should not be standing on that. When we think about you know, the racialization of poverty, right? That is, it's people of color. Those intersectional pieces of cannot be taken out of the conversation around talking to doulas around what is happening. Who also access doulas, like who is actually accessing doula services, right? And so I will leave it at that so I can grab this guy. But yes, that is my answer.
Anna or Katie, would either of you guys like to chat about that and those things? I realize that I think it's just my face on the video. You guys aren't seeing these lovely faces in front of me that I'm seeing. So I apologize about that, but you're hearing their lovely words.
that is okay. And if you do want to change that, you can just change the view at the top right-hand corner, Chantel.
I've tried.
To speaker view? No?
Yeah, I've done that.
So, while you try Zoom things, I can add on to what Aruna was saying, because absolutely, just to echo it, I really think there is, even when we begin to conceptualize queer families, there's an understandable queer family. And the understandable queer family is white cis mom plus white cis mom plus anonymous sperm donor equals baby. And as soon as we step outside of that into BIPOC families, into solo parents, into trans folks, into fat folks, into disabled folks, then the health system comes with all of those other intersections of racism, of colonialism, of classism, ableism. All of those pieces are still absolutely in play. So I come to parenthood and I come to doula work with a lot of privilege. I am white. I do have class privilege. I created my family in a way that people can understand a lot of times. And as a gender non-conforming fat person, my pregnancy was still pretty inconceivable to a lot of people. And not only inconceivable, invisible. I could go into a healthcare provider's office at 9 months pregnant with my partner, and my partner would be asked how far along she was, because people literally could not see my body as pregnant. So if we can't even consider people within the realm of possibility, then how does that impact care? We've seen it in terms of medical mismanagement of trans folks' care, of pregnancies that aren't acknowledged, how pain is treated. All of these different things, I think, come right back to the intersections of identity.
Mm. Yeah. Katie?
I mean, yeah, just to underscore everything that's been said so far. It's fun going last because I can just say, yeah, to everything that's been said. And I think it's highlighting for me, like, this is where it can be difficult, I think, especially if some of these ideas are newer or being revisited. It's hard to, it's easy to think, well, I'm not transphobic, I have a trans friend, or I'm not racist, I have a friend who's a person of color. I'm saying that because you can't see us, I'm a white person. And this is something I have heard myself saying in the past and hear people say all the time. And I think this conversation is highlighting that when we talk about how these things intersect, we're talking at that systems level. Like Aruna did an amazing job of highlighting those systems. Like I don't need to repeat any of that. That was all brilliant. So it's not about, we need to look beyond ourselves when we're thinking about those intersections and our intentions as care providers or as humans to look at what are the systemic barriers a person is experiencing because of the way our very society is structured. Like individually, we can't change that in one moment. So how can we work within that? And one thing I wanted to highlight here is like my specific intersection at a lot of my work is around body size, as well as queerness, transness, race, ability, class, all of these things, or how they coalesce or come together around fatness specifically. And in one project I was part of, we looked at the experiences of fat people in reproductive care, so like accessing, trying to become pregnant, and then also following them, or following their reflections through pregnancy if they did become pregnant, and then also childbirth and the postpartum periods. So kind of cover that whole reproductive spectrum, you might want to call it. And what we see is in trans, specifically in trans and queer parents who are also fat, who are also indigenous, or also people of color, there's so many things that are already assumed about them accessing those services. Let's say accessing from the point of reproductive services. As an example, I mean, Aruna highlighted about how, BIPOC folks are often not seen as like even being able to be parents or be good parents or be like in this system. Same with fat parents. And oftentimes, let's say a trans queer family is accessing fertility services, there's an assumption if they're fat that it's because they're infertile because they're fat, or they're high risk inherently because they have a fat body. I mean, one of our articles is literally called "This Isn't a High-Risk Body," quoting one of the participants. And so they're already coming into reproductive care with that, even if the reason for accessing that care is we just need some sperm, or we just need whatever the anatomical things are that are needed to do the biological process, right? But the assumption is, oh, well, if you're in a larger body, you must be sick. You must be having fertility issues beyond just, being a relationship that requires some assistance. And that carries through. So for, when a doula might become involved or other care providers might become involved, that trauma is sitting with that person all through their pregnancy and maybe and their subsequent, hopefully, childbirth and postpartum experiences, that every interaction they're coming to, and I'm here speaking as a fat person and someone who has not myself been pregnant or birthed a child, but has witnessed this in my work and in my friendships and families, is that trauma carries through. And so as a support person, that's part of seeing somebody as a whole person, and then also, as others have highlighted, looking at this stuff from in a systemic way, right? To understand, like, we might have good intentions. I might not be fat phobic. Maybe I'm a thin care provider who's identifies as not fat phobic. Because folks can't see me, I'll also identify I'm a fat person, a proudly fat person. But we can't just fall back on our good intentions. We have to really look at the trauma people experience and the way their bodies are inherently problematized in this spectrum of, reproductive care, childbirth care, etc., prenatal, postnatal, the whole spectrum. I think to me that's the thing to highlight, is like that those things carry through with people. And my specific experiences around body size and trans and queerness, and it's everything all at once. You can't just look at one part of somebody's identity and say, I understand that. We're always intersectional people in every interaction. We can't separate those things.
Yeah. You guys
just to add really quickly to that.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Just add really quickly to that. Those experiences of trauma don't begin when you go to have a baby. It's not only for second-time parents or people who've been pregnant before. I can remember experiencing fat phobia in a pediatrician's office when my feet didn't yet reach the floor. I've experienced homophobia in medical offices since I was a teenager. So by the time I came to have a baby, I was already 20 plus years into fat phobia and at least a decade plus into homophobia and cissexism and transphobia. So all of those experiences impacted how I went in from the very first.
Yeah. And so, and maybe Anna, you can start this conversation, but as a birth worker, how can we disrupt the heterosexism and, all those things that come along with the trauma? How can we disrupt that so that our clients and the people that we work with have better experiences?
Yeah, I think Katie has already really spoken to it, where we talk so much about how do we disrupt homophobia, how do we disrupt transphobia, how do we be not homophobic or not transphobic. But instead of just looking at that, how do we actually create something good? Like, instead of just tearing down the bad and replacing it with what? An imagined neutral? What do we create that's actually centered around queer and trans folks and BIPOC folks and fat folks and disabled folks and all of these different pieces? And I think it's a complicated question, and one that I certainly don't have all or most or maybe even any of the answers to. I just work on changing the pieces that I can. So for me, that's about individual work. It's about being present as a birth worker. It's about working intentionally within my community and within other communities of people marginalized within larger health systems. And then it's about putting pressure on those health systems where I can, whether it's through education, whether it's through advocacy, whether it's through protest, and that takes different forms at different times. And sometimes it's nice. Sometimes it's me smiling in a Zoom box and running a workshop for birth workers, and sometimes it is not nice. Sometimes it might look and feel like yelling. And all of those pieces are valid and important and need to be there.
Thank you. Katie, did you have other points that you wanted to add on that as well? And a lot of this we're talking about birth work, and it seems like it's people who are pregnant and having their babies. And for you as a postpartum doula, I'm sure you can kind of talk about the other side of it, as people are seeing they're growing their families, they have their babies, and they're seeing that side of the care.
Yeah, I just want to highlight something that Anna said a moment ago, because you referred to working with your own community. And I think that's actually a starting place for everyone. I think we sometimes rely on people. So in this example, if this is a newer area, let's say you're a straight person, you're a cisgender person, that's a word we've thrown around, and in case it's not a common word folks are familiar with, it means that you identify with the sex you were assigned at birth. That's what being cis means. I don't want to throw around jargon, but so sometimes folks in that position can rely on people who are already marginalized to do that educating. And so I think it's educating yourself, listening to voices that have already spoken, whether it's being here now or listening to the recording, whether it's doing some Googling and some learning from trans and queer people in this realm, in this field, and then also talking to other cis and straight birth workers about what you're learning. Talk about it when there's no one trans or queer in the room. Talk about racism when there's no BIPOC person in the room to absorb that trauma. Talk to your communities about these things, about these intersectional things and what you're learning and how you're trying to do better. That's just a brief thing to build on that, like going back to your own community piece. I think in terms of the postpartum work, one of the things that I was thinking about and have experienced in my communities as well is something that feels really specific, but I think I'm going to use it as an example. But I know that oftentimes in queer families, queer folks or trans folks who are, in that postpartum phase or planning to be soon, there can sometimes feel like an absence. Sometimes, family of origin is not in the person's life because it's not safe for them to be. And along with that goes not always having the support, even if that was a traumatic or bad relationship, it's still a missing piece. And sometimes there are, for example, family traditions around after a baby comes, and whether it's family support, whether it's something as simple as like a baby shower, or whatever those traditions are that different people have, that a trans and queer family might need support in creating their own traditions that feel good for whatever their family looks like, and including their chosen family, and having no expectations of including any kind of family of origin if it's not safe to do so. Like, that's just one example of in that postpartum period. And I think it's also coming to care without any assumptions. And so it's not only sharing your pronouns when you're introducing yourself to a new client or new person who is part of the community, but just sharing your pronouns and not requiring other people to share theirs, but just saying, hi, this is my name and my pronouns are this, just opens a little tiny window of possibility that maybe you won't be weird about using they them pronouns for that person, for example. There was another thing, and I think and I guess the other small thing there in any care is, like, when you mess up pronouns, just apologize and move on. Don't make a big deal of it. Don't apologize profusely and force the person to say, no, it's okay. Like, just apologize, move on, use the right pronouns, it's fine. And some interesting things I have found, even when I'm working with straight families, and cis families, being who I am, and a lot of my identity is very visible on me, and I'm very open about my identities with the families I work with, but it opens up conversations. I was recently supporting a family, and their older child was having some gender stuff and was switching pronouns and was wanting to wear dresses to school and had been assigned male at birth, and had decided, that they didn't want their pronouns to change necessarily. They weren't sure what that meant because they were in kindergarten, but they wanted to wear dresses to school. They wanted to paint their nails, and they might want to be identified as their little sibling's sister now instead of their brother. And that provided opportunities. Like, when I was there for the family, we would talk about that. That's not postpartum work, really, but it's supporting a family as a whole. That family was not a LGBTQ2S plus family, but maybe they are. I don't know what that little person's trajectory will be, or who they are, who they will become. But that's an example of, like, when we come to these support spaces with that openness, no matter who the people are, who we think they are, it opens up conversations where we can just have safe conversations. That, in that example, the little one's mom was just like, hey, what do you think I should do? Like, and then what do we do if my child's now bullied because of this? Like, that's what we're anticipating. Do you have any recommendations? And this is just a conversation we're having while, she's nursing the little one, and I'm, taking a break or getting lunch or whatever, but that provides that openness for those conversations if we enter with openness and compassion, and not just, slapping a rainbow flag on our website or something, but really living and embodying that kind of, like, openness to people in their full human selves.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Aruna?
Can you repeat the question? I get lost in all of the amazing comments. I'm just like, yes, 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 and then I forget the question.
It was, how can we as birth workers disrupt heterosexism in our work?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that like Anna and Kate really touched on a lot of it. And I think another, what I will reiterate, because I think that it's really important to think about, is if you work at a doula organization, or if you are a doula, thinking about how your practices are not even considering, not even thinking about the possibilities of different kinds of families and different kinds of creating families, or any of these pieces. Yes, yeah, fishies, amazing. Yeah. Sorry, it's been a long week of her being home, and so a lot of it is just needing a lot of mom attention. So, yeah, I think that like I'm actually really tired of straight folks needing to like hear about how they can change their practice. To be quite honest, I feel like it's like 2022. You can check Google first of all if you don't know what cisgender means, and then second of all, like if you really need to like think about why your organization is like probably full of straight white people, then you probably have a bigger problem, right? Like this is not like new. This is not something that's like, we've been like cutie BIPOC folks and queer folks and trans folks have been like talking about this forever. We've gotten to the place where we have also just created our own stuff because we're tired of waiting for all of you all to like catch up with us, you know? So I feel like that's also another piece to it. I'm just like, just get with it. I don't really know what the issue is. We don't want stickers. We don't want t-shirts. We want like institutional systemic change. That's it. So if you're not able to look at your policies, look at your hiring practices, looking at the ways that you train people, the ways that you understand, also like who has access to your services, then like it's okay, right? You can also just say like, this is not a priority for us. And then just go about your business and have mostly just white, like middle upper class people who you serve. That's your prerogative, right? Yeah, baby, it's the Wiggles and Elmo. Amazing. It's a combo situation right now. And so, yeah, I think that that's another piece to it, right? Is like, you don't have to do this. I mean, it's probably better for your overall like practice too, because, you know, I mean, why would you want to just be centered towards one particular group of people? I also always say that, like, when you center your most, like, vulnerable or marginalized community, everyone benefits. When you center Black and Indigenous people, everyone benefits. That's what I think we don't understand because of capitalism and colonization, but, like, we need to be able to center, like, our most precarious, the folks that need the most support, and with that, everybody benefits from that, you know? So I think that, like, yes, 1 second, please. I think that that's, like, the biggest pieces that kind of just, like, I'm going to piggyback off of what has been already said, because there's already been so much brilliant stuff. But, yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, I've never heard this before, I think you should probably use Google, you know, like, look it up. It is not that hard. It is, like, it's very much out there, and also like there's tons of trainings, right? There's tons of things that you can do to like think, you know, hire people, hire queer and trans BIPOC people, like, or there's people out there doing the work. And so, yeah, I think we handhold straight folks and white folks too much, to be honest, and I'm kind of tired of it. So that's my 2 cents.
I love your 2 cents, and it's worth so much more. You know, the words that you speak, Aruna, are very, as a cis white person, it very much kind of speaks to, you know, the work that I've been doing and that many white people have been doing. And so I thank you for kind of speaking those words to those who need to hear it. It's very important. So tonight we've had our technical difficulties, but I think we've had some really great discussions as well. And it doesn't even begin to kind of start to scratch the surface in the discussions that need to happen. I know that Anna is doing lots of webinars through Doula Canada. Katie and Aruna, I would love as well if you have any things that are coming up that you guys are teaching or instructing or putting out that knowledge. We can put it in the Just Birth event page as well. I will pin your Instagram handles and things like that, and give your bios there so that people who couldn't see your faces tonight on the video will be able to see it in the event page. So thank you for being here. Any final words before we end this discussion?
I just wanted to quickly, before we fully leave the last discussion, it's hard on Zoom, especially with Facebook Live, and like we've been using reactions a little bit, but I know people on live can't say that, but I just can't see that. But I just want to say, like, Aruna, as you were speaking, I was wanting to just turn up the volume on everyone's devices, not on mine. But mine as well. I just want to really underscore everything that you were saying about educating yourself, and it's time, and do the work, and the information is there. Thank you for saying what you've said. I just wanted to really turn up the volume. Yeah, thank you.
One question that's coming up on the feed, on the comments is there a way to eliminate systems like fertility investigation and sperm quarantine while maintaining medical ethics? Anna, you have your speaker off.
Sorry, I didn't hear. I was just having a small technical difficulty. I think my Zoom froze for a minute. There was a question, Chantal?
There was. So is there a way to eliminate systems like fertility investigation and sperm quarantine while maintaining medical ethics?
So okay. Medical ethics. There's nothing ethical about medical ethics. Medical ethics are based on profit and capitalism and benefiting the most privileged. Also, sperm quarantining is done. At an actual legal level, sperm quarantining doesn't exist anymore. But fertility clinics still impose it. Why? Because they can, because they don't know, because they don't care. It doesn't actually matter. So if you actually want to work within communities, knowing these things, being able to inform people of these things, and knowing that they aren't the only ways that people are forming their families, right? People are going out and have always been going out and building their families through chosen family, through known donors, through hookups, doing what they need to do to build their families outside of those systems as well.
Wonderful. And maybe, Anna, can you kind of define sperm quarantining for those of the listeners that don't really know what that is?
So sperm for a long time has been treated under the Food and Drug Act. Is it a food or is it a drug? Who knows? And under that would need to be quarantined. I believe it was for 6 months. I was going to say don't quote me on that, but it's recorded. That is no longer law. But if you look at most fertility clinics, at least the ones that I've checked the policies of, they will still quarantine the sperm, not of male partners, but of known donors for 6 months or longer, which means that people then feel forced to lie about their families if they are going through fertility clinics and say, oh yeah, this guy is my boyfriend, this guy is my husband, and then further adds to the invisibility of queer and trans families.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's
and it's not enforced, right? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So it's not enforced, right? So the law has changed, legislation has changed around it. The requirements, or I think it's even a policy directive has changed, but there's no enforcement around it. So they're not going to go around being like, you can't do this to people anymore. The government doesn't give a shit, neither does these clinics, right? So for them, they're whatever, you have to pay us to quarantine us anyways and hold it here, so we don't get to worry about it. But that's something that you can advocate for also, if that's happening. But nothing is really getting enforced. So whether or not the legislation changes is irrelevant, to be honest, because each clinic can also have their own policies internally that they then determine how they do things. So, yeah.
I just want to underscore one comment you made, Anna, about having to lie about like the makeup of a partnership or a family. Like, it's not only invalidating and forcing someone to make themselves invisible, but it's also outright dangerous for some families who are more likely to come under scrutiny for lying, and more likely to have their children taken away. Racialized, Black, Indigenous families, poor families who have more contact with those systems. Lying in any kind of medical setting to preserve yourself and your well-being, or to access services, no matter the reason, is a very high risk as well, and adds to the, it's not only invalidating and invisibilizing, is that a word? It's also dangerous for particular bodies and particular people to have to do that in that kind of official setting.
Wow, that seems like we need a whole new conversation, a whole new episode on that for sure. Okay, well, thank you all for being here tonight, or today, whatever time zone that you're in.
I think there were a couple of other questions in the chat. Are we going to?
What else? One was, is there a way to see the speakers? I wish. So I'm going to make sure that their faces are seen afterwards and do a little spotlight on them. And then the other one was, what kind of lens does the rainbow flag imply for you? Liberalism?
I think that was at me. I don't know. So for me, I guess it's very much about very liberally, for me it's about pink washing, essentially. And so that's where it feels very used and abused very much, of what the intention was. Obviously, everyone says Stonewall was a riot, but then forgets that when folks like BLM need our support, or land back movements happen. Those are part of why Stonewall happened, right? And why when we have a housing crisis in Toronto, where are all these upper middle class LGBTQ folks who are so excited about their rights, but what about poor queer people, right? So I think there's a lot of things that happen with the way that liberalism and pink washing happen around pride, around the flag in itself as a symbol. I've never ever identified with the pride flag. It actually, the discomfort for me actually feels it's a political issue with it, as opposed to an identity one. I always said that I identify politically as queer first, but queerness is not my most primary identity, right? I'm a Caribbean diasporic person. I'm a person of color. I'm fat. There's so many things about. I'm an abolitionist first and foremost. That centers my politic, and there is so much more radicalness and radical living and possibility to queerness that has been completely washed over by things like pink washing and the pride flag. So yeah, y'all can keep your pride flag. I much rather, there's so many other things that represent more intentional, things like mutual aid, taking care of each other, fighting back against different kinds of systems that exist. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to teach my kids. Yeah.
Just to add really quickly to that is also the way that, and this is implied in everything you said, Aruna, but really tangible examples, especially as Pride Month is approaching. Corporations just slap the pride flag on, no matter what their actions are, every other month, day of the year. A really good example of this, I'm not going to go into too many details, but recently there was action here addressing a very harmful person who is being hosted at an institution here in where I live, and a few queer and trans and racialized folks came together to write a letter to our city councilor to say this is not okay, this is unsafe for us. And we were told, well, there's nothing we can do, we're not willing to change it. And then the same people who were sending us that message and we're not willing to keep our community safe for specifically trans and racialized people in this situation, on the, what was the recent day, the day against homophobia and transphobia or whatever it was, on Twitter, of course, plastered the trans visibility flag and the pride flag all over their feeds, and we just love our community members who are part of these communities, whereas literally a week ago we were told in private from the same individuals, oh, well, there's nothing we can do to make our communities actually safer. We're not willing to cancel this event or to not host this person who is incredibly dangerous for people in our community. That's one example of sort of this pink washing and this like corporate entity or whatever, just putting the pride flag and using it to cover up. It's not even just instead of, it's covering up injustice and direct physical as well as psychological, emotional, etc. harm to people in the community.
So many discussions need to be had. The more that we talk through this, these are definitely some more discussions that we can get scheduled over the next fall months and going into the winter months for sure. Again, thank you all for being here.
Aruna has their hand up.
Oh, I'm not seeing it. Aruna, yes.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I know we're out of time, so I don't want to
Nope, go for it.
continue this conversation because it's like something I can talk about forever. But I just literally looked because I was like, let's try this thing that I just keep asking people to do, which is just Google it. And if you've never heard of pink washing before, and if you're one of those like liberal queers who are like, I love the pride flag, I love going to all the things, then like, good for you. And also maybe just like Google it because it literally says on Wikipedia, pink washing is a strategy of promoting LGBTQ rights protections as evidence of liberalism and democracy. Hi, baby, 1 second. Especially to distract from or legitimize violence against other countries or communities, right? That is essentially exactly what the issue is there. So that to answer your question, whoever asked that, like that is very much it, right? So I'm not interested in something, none of us are free until we're all free. So I don't think that we can have this like raw pride situation when like lots of our community are still really suffering. It just reminds me of when banks, have the pride flag all over the place. Meanwhile, they're knee deep in the tar sands or in this like inconsistent like resource extraction from indigenous communities. Like, what are you doing? So those are some things that I think are why I don't identify with the pride flag. Yeah.
Some really great points and thoughts that I had never heard before around the pride flag and pink washing. So definitely some new information for me. So I'm sure the listeners are hearing that as well. There are a couple of comments there about how this was a lovely episode and thank you from some people there in the comment section. So again, thank you. It's been wonderful for me to see you guys, but to hear from you as well. And like I said, I'm going to pin your profiles into the events page so that people know who you are and have some contact info there if they'd like to reach out. Wonderful. Well, thank you all. Good night, everybody. And we will see you at next month's webisode.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.